Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. This is the second in the series of talks on the Sangha. In the first talk, I gave a very simple overview. Today, we will look at the early Sangha in India, some key figures. And in the next talk, we'll look at some of the Bodhisattva Sangha who established the Mahayana teachings. In the previous talk, we saw the main elements which make the Sangha famous as the finest of gatherings, the finest of assemblies. In our life as humans, we tend to gather as groups. Maybe some of you are part of a Facebook group or a Yahoo group, or locally in organizations. There are many groups. Groups share a common interest, or sometimes a common goal. So when we consider the Sangha, the interest is in the truth about ourselves, about everything. We share that heartfelt interest in goodness. And we have a goal. The goal is freedom, making this life what it can be, bringing the world to better things. So it says the finest of all gatherings, the finest of all groups is our Sangha. Sometimes the Sangha are called the best of friends. We have all sorts of friendships and family relationships. Nearly always there is a vested interest, self-interest. The best of friends care for other people selflessly. They don't have strings attached. They don't have a personal agenda. And in the Sangha, our Sangha that is a refuge, are the best of friends because they are entirely there to help through sharing the Buddha's teaching with no vested interest, no self-interest. So they're the finest of all friends, and also the finest of friends because their gift to us is the most valuable gift ever, the gifts of love and wisdom. So today we're going to consider some of the very, very first members of the Sangha as it developed, some of the most important names. In the previous talk, we saw how the 5 ascetics became the first 5 disciples and important in the very initial founding of the Sangha. But now when we look back at the whole teaching life of the Buddha, several names stand out. The first one maybe we can consider is that of Ananda. Ananda and the Buddha had been closely linked, life after life after life. And we see this in the Jataka stories, the past lives of the Buddha, where again and again they're related. So it's said that they were born on the same day. Born on the same day. And because the Buddha's own mother died 7 days after his birth, it was Ananda's mother who became the Buddha's stepmother, wet nurse. And Ananda was given another wet nurse. So they are indeed very closely related. And in Ananda we have the person who spent the most time with the Buddha. Sometimes he's described as his attendant, but he was much more than that, and this is very clear. He was like the Buddha's right-hand person, the Buddha's general secretary, but more than that, much more than that. He was the person who cared for the Buddha for 25 years. And during that time, he had that priceless gift of feeling the Buddha's presence and of experiencing the way the Buddha dealt with situations and people who came to him. Ananda was also blessed with perfect memory. So he remembered the Buddha's teachings. It is said that he could recite some 60,000 verses without a single mistake of the Buddha's teachings. It's amazing. And it is for that reason that after the Buddha's passing in the first council, Ananda, through all the time he spent with the Buddha and his presence in more teachings than anybody else, he became the arbiter, the referee for establishing the Buddha's teachings as people gathered together to try to put together everything the Buddha had taught. Because he spent so much time caring for the Buddha, some of the other Sangha thought that Ananda neglected his practice. They even criticized him a bit for it. But the Buddha twice defended him and said what he was doing was the very best. And the Buddha predicted that he would become an arhat, which is what they all wanted to do. And indeed he did, but after the Buddha's passing. Ananda was blessed with a very long life. It is said that he lived for some 120 years. Ananda was a sort of a Mahakala figure, a protector. He protected the Buddha and he protected and nurtured the Sangha, and he was the main go-between between the Sangha and the Buddha, the person who sorted things out, who helped when there were problems, who made sure that the people who needed to get to the Buddha got to the Buddha, and that the Buddha's advice was properly transmitted and put into practice in the Sangha. So Ananda was very important. Sometimes when we see in temples a statue of the Buddha, then on either side you have Shariputra and Moggallana, who are often depicted as the two main disciples of the Buddha. What they represent, in fact, is learning and meditation, which are the two main axes of the Buddha's teaching. So they're quite symbolic in one way, but they were also the two elders during much of the time of the Sangha. Here again, we have two people who, in the past lives of the Buddha, appear again and again, very closely connected with each other. And it's said that in the Buddha's final life, as Prince Gautama, they were conceived on the same day and they were born on the same day. And indeed, later on, they were to die pretty much on the same day, just a week or two before the actual passing of the Buddha. So amazingly connected. Now of those two, Shariputra, it means the son of Shari, was the one who was the most learned, a brilliant mind, a great scholar, and a great friend for the rest of the Sangha. A teacher, because he could explain the Buddha's teachings very, very clearly to them. He was, we can't really say scholar, because scholars study books and ideas, and because he had the Buddha alive there, he wasn't so much a scholar as a living holder of the conceptual part of the teachings. The other main elder, great disciple, was Mahamoggallana, who was famous for his clairvoyant powers, his gained through meditation practice. And he is the one who gives us stories of other realms, such as the deprived spirits, the hungry ghosts, the pretas, the devas, because his mind was so clear that he could experience those worlds and bring us back actual stories of beings there and their previous lives and so on. So these two elders complemented each other very nicely. The power of meditation, the power of conceptual understanding. But unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, but let's say they died just before the Buddha's passing. Because they had just died and the Buddha's own passing was imminent, the Buddha made it very clear that he would not appoint a successor to himself. He said the Dharma would be his successor after his passing, then the teachings themselves. And he made as the guardian of those teachings another one of his main disciples, the elder Kasyapa, Mahakasyapa. Mahakasyapa was the example for us of meditation practice and total devotion to that. He wasn't much of a scholar. He was very, very reluctant to teach, although he had much to share. He spent every possible moment that he could in practicing the teachings of the Buddha. He lived in utter simplicity. He wore rags, and the Buddha said he had total confidence in him. And so, as he was leaving this world, he appointed Kasyapa to be the first of the patriarchs who would be the senior member of the Sangha. So we need to make that difference between the Dharma, the teachings, being the real successor of the Buddha, but the Sangha having senior figures and one person who was taking the most care of it. Which is what Kasyapa did very, very beautifully. If we go back to Shariputra and Mahamokkallana, then they were friends who set out quite young in a quest for truth in the form of something that transcends death. They were looking for the path to deathlessness. And they decided it would be more efficient if they didn't seek it together, but if they each sought it in different places with different teachers, and whoever found it first would seek out the other and bring them to what they discovered. So they both ended up with the Buddha through different routes, through different encounters. And upon meeting the Buddha, each of them attained profound and lasting realization within a matter of days. It was 1 week for one, 2 weeks for the other, very, very quickly. They were outstanding disciples. With the story of Kasyapa, who was to become the first leader of the Sangha after the Buddha, then he, when he set out on his path, was in fact part of a couple. Two very spiritual people, man and woman, and they set out to find the truth. Kasyapa found the Buddha, and we'll see later on that his friend, his wife, soon would join the Buddha as well, once the order of nuns was established, to become one of his main female disciples. So who were the main female disciples? Let's consider a few of them. The very first one, and the one the Buddha declared to be the most outstanding, was his foster mother, Mahaprajapati. And with her, the female Sangha started, let's say, in style. Very often the old texts give us the number 500. It was the Sanskrit way of saying hundreds. It means maybe not as much as 1,000, but more than 100. So it said that she brought with her some 500 friends or ladies, and they became nuns soon after her, along with her. They were all admitted to the Sangha. So the female Sangha did not develop one by one slowly in its first days, but it started with hundreds, mainly through Mahaprajapati. And she became an outstanding, an excellent practitioner of the Buddha's teachings. The Buddha himself said so. Also, we have the Buddha's wife, Yasodhara. Yashodhara was a very spiritual person. Some people think of her just as his wife, somebody beautiful in the worldly sense, and the mother of his son. But in fact, she was a deeply spiritual person. From the outset, they lived together as very spiritual people, and when the Buddha left to find the truth, from that time onwards, it says she dressed very simply, and in the palace she lived a disciplined life of meditation and practice. She was waiting for the time when she could join him, and at the same time, of course, bringing up their son, Rahula, who himself later was to become an outstanding bhikkhu. So Yasodhara, his wife, joined the Sangha once it was open to female ordination and became another one of his outstanding disciples. Then we have two queens. One must remember that there were many small kingdoms, so queen is maybe a bit too much, but two very noble ladies, there would be, I suppose, like countesses or something like that in Europe. The first one was Arya Kema. She's noticeable because she became enlightened on the spot, seeing the Buddha. She attended the Buddha's teachings in the Jetavana Grove, and it was there that just on seeing him, feeling his presence, she understood. It says she was enlightened. We need to understand that. It doesn't mean she got the same enlightenment as the Buddha. It means she understood in a way that would stay with her forever, change her forever, in a very clear way. A huge, irreversible breakthrough. So Arya Kema gained realization without even going through a phase of renunciation first. She was famous for her wisdom, her very wise and pithy sayings and ability to sum up the Buddha's teaching to the other nuns. There was another queen, Queen Samavati. Queen Samavati was described by the Buddha as the most kind and loving and purest of his female disciples. She had that beautiful quality of warm-heartedness and love and total cleanness, purity of conduct, body, speech and mind. Unfortunately, she was assassinated very cruelly, and her, along with her followers, were assassinated by a jealous queen from another kingdom. Sad story. Amongst the female disciples, maybe we can also mention Kisagotami. Maybe you've heard the story about how she lost her baby and she couldn't cope with the idea, she couldn't face it, so she carried around the corpse of her baby, looking for someone who could bring it back to life. She went to the Buddha and he sent her from house to house to get a grain of rice from any house where there hadn't been death, and to bring him back a bowlful. And of course she soon understood that death and suffering are everywhere. She became one of his eminent disciples. And then we have his disciple Patachara. Patachara became the main holder of the Vinaya, the rules. Now what we need to know is that the Buddha never decided we'll make a Sangha and these will be the sets of rules for each level. There are many hundreds of rules, 230 odd rules for the monks, more than 300 for the nuns. And those rules developed, each one out of a situation. So there were no rules to start with. People practiced. But then situations occurred. People went to the Buddha to ask for his counsel, his advice, which he gave, and then that became a rule. And as more and more things happened, and as he travelled and gave more advice, so the rules from the Sangha gradually emerged. The main holder of the rules for the bhikkhus during the Buddha's lifetime was the monk Upali, who practiced monastic conduct best, and who was the most knowledgeable about the rules. He became the elder for the rules, Upali. And amongst the female Sangha, there was Patachara, who became the equivalent, very, very learned, very pure of conduct. And finally, let's mention Badri Kapilani. You'll remember that Kasyapa, before going to the Buddha, was part of a very spiritual couple. So when he found the Buddha, Kapilani realized that he'd found the way, and she wanted also to follow that way. She waited until the order of nuns was established. She became a very eminent member of the female Sangha, and the Buddha praised her, above all others, for her recollection of past lives. She had very clear memories of past lives, what happened, the karmas created, and what they caused. During the 45 years of then the Sangha developed. After the Buddha's passing, they gathered together in the first council under the leadership of Ananda as the judge, and people discussed the various teachings they'd received and heard from the Buddha, and these were brought together to form the body of the Buddha's teachings, and it was the beginning of Buddhism. It is said that in India, because of the monsoons, the monks would gather together for the 3 months of the rains when they couldn't really travel or do much else, and that they would share and learn by heart the teachings of the Buddha and keep them alive. Although there was writing at the time, it wasn't used for spiritual things. It was used by merchants. Anything considered spiritual was learned by heart, not kept in a book. And most people couldn't read and write anyway. So the Sangha learned the teachings by heart. There were many thousands of them, so between them they could be sure of memorizing all of those teachings. They kept the teachings alive as practice, as ideas. And because there were so many teachings, with time, then groups practicing one or another of the Buddha's teachings developed, and we get the different streams of Buddhism. Thanks to the brilliant examples of the early Sangha, as we've seen, there were scholars, renunciates, meditators, people with many, many gifts. But more than anything, those who became the true and pure holders of the Buddha's teachings and who could be the finest friends for beings, who constituted the very, very best of assemblies. Thank you very much, as always, for listening, for thinking about these things. And there'll be another talk next about some of the key figures in the development of Mahayana, the Bodhisattva Sangha. I hope you have a wonderful day wherever you are. Thank you.